Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, January 9th In-Depth Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Our first map tonight looks at the jet stream level winds since the beginning of this year. We've been talking extensively about how the jet stream winds have really come across much of the northern hemisphere in a very zonal pattern. That means more west to east flow than north to south. They've been extended coming off of China and Japan, targeting all the way across the Pacific here into California. And across much of the United States, a lack of high amplitude features, either troughs or ridges, has really kept the pattern mild. It's kept it open. For a lot of folks, it's been wet, but some places have been missed. You can really just follow the strongest winds to see who's received the precipitation and who's not. Now, just for contrast, because folks in California that have taken kind of the brunt of this, remember that a year ago, all the moisture had kind of shut off in this area. So I would like to just show you the difference between this year's jet stream level winds to begin January and last year. So you see the difference this year to last year. The jet would fail to extend. It would build up into a huge ridge here over the Bering Sea. We'd have weak flow coming out of the Gulf of Alaska that dove across the northern tier of the United States and then exited. Now, this was an important pattern throughout much of the rest of winter to deliver some extremely heavy snow across the northern plains of the United States at times. But what a difference, again, last year versus this year. So some of our top questions are going to be tonight. How much longer will this last, and should we expect to see more of it throughout the remainder of this winter? Because the winds continue to come off of China and Japan and target the west coast. In fact, the moisture that's coming into California now, a couple of days ago, was sitting over the top of Hawaii. It's why I often call it the Pineapple Express. Now, in the last 7 days, and this, by the way, does not include the precipitation from today. This map goes through midnight, or 12 a.m. this morning. We can see that most of the heaviest precipitation has been, of course, in Northern California, but it's been very limited to just this geographical area. See it here? In other words, we've not seen the stronger onshore flow to the north, getting up into parts of Oregon and Washington, and certainly not pretty far to the south. We've seen very limited action in the jet stream to develop lee cyclones. That's winter storms that show up on the other side of the mountains. We had one, that was the one that went through like this. That's the one that put down the extremely heavy snow into this area, which is still sitting on the ground in some places, although it's been trying to melt. It's also the one that's helped deliver some of the very heavy rainfall, like the Tennessee Valley, the Ohio Valley, and getting down to the lower Mississippi River Valley, which we talked about last week as being very important for filling back in the Mississippi and its tributaries. Notice, though, we've got a couple of holes in the eastern side of the country, like in and around Washington, D.C., right along the coast of the Carolinas, down into southern Florida. But one we're going to keep a continual eye on is the very dry conditions we've seen in the western and southern plains, from western Kansas through the panhandles, getting into most of western Texas and New Mexico. We've also missed out in Montana. All right, no good onshore flow, plus very warm conditions have actually melted a lot of the snow in this area. And we've had very dry conditions coming out of the Canadian prairie through the northern plains. But where it has been wettest, of course, is right back in California. And I just want to show you one update. We looked at this last week. It was Lake Oroville. Now, remember we talked about how Lake Oroville reached its lowest point really around the end of November last year at about 657, 58 feet. And we know that full pool is 900 feet. So since that time period, it's gone from 658, and it is now currently sitting at almost 740 feet. So it has picked up a tremendous amount of water just here in the last 60 days or so, and most of it coming in the last 10 to 15. All right, another way to look at this is just to take a look at the last 2 weeks in terms of percent of normal precipitation. I think this map really just illustrates where the jet stream has come through and where it's attempted to exit and who's missed. We have yet to see this year a really good East Coast cyclone, a nor'easter. The pattern has not set that up. And even though last week we thought we would get something late this week here, the models have trended it back to the west over the last several forecast runs. So we just are trying to contrast those areas that have been so very dry with those areas that have been so very wet. And coming into this part of California through Nevada, Utah, then ejecting through here, there are several places that have had between 500% and 1,200% of normal precipitation. And again, this map goes through yesterday morning. They're updated every day, but they have a day of quality control lag in them. So this doesn't even include what we saw today coming in. So what did happen today? Well, here's some infrared satellite imagery showing you. I just take you back to this morning. You can see the flow. This is infrared satellite imagery here, just showing just an onslaught of moisture coming into California, coming into Nevada. In fact, it just updated. They're giving us the newest images. And that flow has been relentless across this area. We got another storm system lined up behind it. Now, to kind of get an idea about what could possibly be changing, and also just, again, taking stock of what we've had, you notice here that when we look out at the forecast of the magnitude of these atmospheric river events, which is just another name for saying these strong onshore flow events from zonal jet stream winds, this one was up there in the strong to moderate category, right in through here. We still have stronger flow coming in tomorrow and another one coming in here between the 11th and 12th. But even the ensemble average plus the operational run is starting to drop off a bit in the frequency of these, but not until we get past like the 16th, 17th, and 18th does the flow really begin to weaken. So it will be interesting to see as these next three events come on shore what it does to the map we're going to continue to look at here, which is our snow water equivalent for the western area. And again, we see that there are parts of California and Nevada that are between 180 and 330% of normal on snowpack. Most locations are doing all right. Still have the Olympic Mountains below normal and the Southern Rockies that are below normal. We're going to get back to that in just a few seconds. But it will be very important to see how this map evolves as we go on through this forecast. Over the weekend, in addition to some snow in parts of New England and some light snow that came out of parts of Missouri into central Illinois, most of the action was again back into the west. And it'll be interesting to see this map tomorrow to see how much more was added just from today's event. When we compare it to normal, this goes through this morning. Again, we're looking at departures. So the idea here is to kind of identify who's yet to receive quite a bit of snow and who's already had quite a bit. We've talked a lot about the haves. Let's talk about the have-nots. For example, this part of Colorado, New Mexico, through Kansas, getting into Nebraska here. Same thing for parts of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and this side of Michigan. And of course, New England without any big nor'easters. Their heavy snow has been confined to those massive lake effect snow events we saw multiple times this year. From here, let's talk about another region on the planet where I'm thinking about snow. Many of you saw this in my morning report, but I'm going to reiterate something here. The map on the left comes from Rutgers Snow Lab. And what it shows you is at the end of December, the snow cover, and we up to 100% and down to 0. Now, most of the Northern Hemisphere snowpack was very good this early winter, but an area that has seen some major changes is right here in parts of Europe, specifically the heat over the last 10 days that have been on the Alps, been on the mountains in Switzerland, for example. These are the source regions for many of Europe's major rivers. And all I'm going to say about it at this point is this could be an early sign of drought risk going into the next spring and summer if we don't see any major correction on the moisture in this area over the next few months. And that's a big if. Of course, it could change. But it's just something I want to keep tabs on at this particular point. Now, this is what I think is going to be important about the change. There's been over the last about decade or so a push to understand the way that the big mountain chains across the planet can induce a torque on the flow. Specifically, the mountains here in the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, this large area in through here. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm still studying this and trying to figure this out. But what you're looking at here is the beginning of this month, so the 1st through the 7th, at surface pressure anomalies. So there was anomalously low pressure here and anomalously high pressure here. And that's the direction the flow goes around them. So it comes around something like this. And what was interesting was that low pressure extended throughout much of the rest of Russia here and then showed up again over the Aleutian Islands. And as a consequence, much of the flow of the atmosphere stayed away from or north of the mountains and the Tibetan Plateau, this area that sticks deep into the atmosphere, almost as deep as, or actually as deep as, in places, the jet stream level winds. In fact, you could argue that Mount Everest sticks up into the stratosphere at times. So when we think about that, we want to know, are the mountains going to influence that jet stream level pattern? So what was important was that during that time period, the jet stream kind of had this component to it. Remember how I kind of showed you the flow? And it came together here and then raced on across the open Pacific Ocean. Now, what is changing in the next 7 to 10 days is this. By the time we get to the end of this week, can you guys get yourself oriented here? Here's India. This is China. We got up here. There's Kazakhstan and Mongolia and Russia. You notice that there is now a very large area of high pressure. and air flows from high to low pressure. So we're getting a net flow in this direction, pushing the high pressure and therefore actually some cold air across China. And China had been an area that's been quite warm recently. What this is in effect going to do, because remember the flow comes around these highs, just generally speaking like this, and there's kind of net push of the atmosphere in this direction, is that this is ultimately going to influence how far out into the Pacific the jet stream will extend. It's affecting the pressure pattern here. It's affecting it over Alaska, the Bering Sea, the Chukchi Sea. It's really, this one change is affecting a lot of things. And I'm going to show you the end results of this. You see, as that mountain torque increases, we're going to go from this jet stream pattern we've been talking about to one that does this. So this is through the end of this week, into Friday. We still have the strong onshore flow. But did you see this interesting trough feature coming off here? Remember, there's a large ridge in place here, trough downstream. By next week, the breakup in the jet stream manifests itself by the 17th, 18th, and 19th as a pretty substantial jet retraction. So now the jet stream is pretty much limited to extending itself just off of the Japanese coast. Doesn't make it into the Gulf of Alaska, and in fact, once it gets here, it splits. And where the jet stream takes over is right in through this area. Now, if you're underneath the jet stream, you have, just generally speaking, better upper level dynamics for rising motion. It moves low pressure systems along, creates them, destroys them. So we're going to have to watch this area into week 2 to be active. But we've now shut off that strong flow in the west, which means we're going to see a break in the action in the west. And possibly some cooler air as we get toward the end of this month being let out of the northern latitudes back into this region. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, while all of this is happening, we notice that the MJO is likely to come out of the western Pacific and maybe move back into the Indian Ocean. Now, we've talked a lot about how the extended jet is not very characteristic of La Niña. Breaking it up and changing it, well, the thing that's doing that is the MJO coming out, aiding in that, coming out into the Indian Ocean again. That's also not very characteristic of La Niña. But what you end up getting out of that is a pattern like this. So the troughs extend to there. That's the extension of the Pacific jet. There's a large ridge that typically happens when the MJO's in the Indian Ocean, like phase 2 here. So the flow comes over the top. There's weak troughing in and around, for example, from the Great Lakes to the Hudson Bay. So the flow makes the turn, has to go up over this ridge, and then accelerates across the open Atlantic Ocean. What I'm trying to tell you is the pattern we're about to see ourselves get into, this one right here, okay, looks very similar to this one. So now we're seeing that the behavior in the polar jet and the behavior in the tropics are linking up, which is increasing the confidence that after the next 7 to 10 days, the Pacific jet is going to back off in a big way. And that's going to give us a whole different look for the end of this month compared to the beginning of this month. All right, that's my background for this. What's happening in the meantime, though, is that the Pacific jet's still extended. So the flood warnings, the flood watches, the high wind advisories, the winter storm warnings, the winter storm advisories, weather advisories, that are scattered throughout the west, that's going to continue to be an issue. All right. So to see how this all plays out, let's go right to our multi-model analysis. GFS on the left, European on the right. As we play this forward, this is the current atmospheric river event we've been talking about coming on shore, and there's the second push by midday tomorrow on Tuesday. As we play this forward, both models are attempting, once we get out there to midday Wednesday evening, to eject a low into Kansas. Out ahead of it through the Ohio Valley, there could be some scattered showers from this and possibly extending all the way down to the Gulf Coast. We'll just watch this whole area for some showers. Not heavy rain, but showers. But the next system coming out here, we've been watching it evolve in the models. And there's a pretty good chance that in Kansas, maybe in southeastern Nebraska, northern Missouri, and into southern Iowa, could get some snow on the backside of this. I'm also concerned as we work our way through the day this upcoming Thursday for some strong to severe storms farther to the south, Wednesday night into Thursday. So again, Wednesday night and Thursday, we need to keep an eye out in this area for the risk of strong to severe storms. As we then go from Thursday morning into Thursday midday, there's cold air in place. But if there was a lot more cold air in place, I'd be much more confident on making the call for the changeover to snow from parts of Missouri into Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin right in through here. As such, the lack of a good deep pool of cold air has got me questioning what this snow could look like and how much it'll mix with rain and what will the liquid to snow ratios be. But again, the front sweeps right through parts of Tennessee into the southeast, bringing heavy rains and possibly some strong storms on Thursday night, and then that low tries to move toward the northeast. But here's what I want to tell you. This low you see here, last week, this is the one that I was talking about possibly being off the East Coast. That was the shift we saw in the weekend model runs, taking this thing farther and farther back toward the Great Lakes in this particular case. Now, during that time, we're not done in California. We still have stronger events coming into the west, but I'm going to do something for you here. If you don't mind, kind of step back from the screen and blur your eyes a bit. Ready? Now, I'm going back to the beginning. Watch the trajectory of systems coming into the west from this direction at the beginning, and then this direction at the end. Ready? I'll keep your eye over here on the European model. See the change right there? Now look, 17th, 18th, 19th. Now the flow's doing something like this, and lows are trying to eject here. That's the change that I'm talking about. And that's the change we're going to have to watch. It's in both models, and they're both even trying all the way out there on day 10 to look almost exactly the same with this system and this one. See it? What they do not agree on, I'll be very clear about that, is whatever this is in the GFS. The GFS has this like cutoff feature right here, and it is nowhere to be found in the European. The European, in fact, has high pressure there. The GFS has low pressure. So we need to see what's going on here. But the other two pieces of the flow seem to fit. Now let's add it all up. We'll just stick with one model to get some perspective here. Taking you through this middle of this week, all the way out into the weekend now. So onshore flow in the west, high precipitation amounts. Remember, this color right here is 2 inches, and we get into these shades when we're above 6, 7, 8 inches. So here's system number 1 coming through. Again, strong storms Wednesday into Thursday. And then there's the next system coming through. So what we need to think about here is that in the next 10 days, I can kind of identify those areas that are going to be, I think, drier than normal. But this whole region in through here is going to have to look out for the potential for some very heavy rainfall. Question is, how far to these coasts will it get? And throughout the west, we continue to see the models until this pattern breaks down, delivering in some places between 3 and 10 inches of rainfall. All right. On the snowfall side of this, let's just see what the operational European model run has. So you can see that system coming out midweek, spreading right into here, could put down a few inches of snow from parts of Kansas to Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan. We're going to watch this change quite a bit, but then as that colder air comes in on the backside, snow in the Appalachian Mountains, maybe some snow in the interior of New England. But the west is what's really going to be seeing the biggest snowfall amounts. And you can see if I take this all the way out there till next Tuesday, the 17th, while we do see a system curling around through here, there's a lot of uncertainty about that one, but come back to the west, we could see another 5 to 7 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada. Snowfall amounts have been picking up for parts of the Central Rockies and also in the Cascades out of this pattern as well. In terms of best chances at getting 3 inches of snow, just want to identify this area and through here, also along the Appalachian Mountains, west-facing slopes, and into the interior of New England. That's the area we're going to keep an eye out on, with the second system following it right in through the northern, or the upper Midwest, excuse me. All right, from here, what's the week 2 pattern do? Well, remember, past the 18th, right there, watch the pattern fall apart in the west. As the jet retracts and we get fully out there to week 2, we go back to a positive P&A pattern. Now, what this trough does going into, at the end of week 2, is possibly keep from Texas, eastern Texas through New England wet. And I was just looking at the report I sent out every morning. If we go to the week 2 precipitation anomalies, there we go. We can see that today's CPC, the newest European week 2, and the GFS, you see how they all identified this area into week 2 as being quite active. So we have something really important to talk about there as we go into the middle of this month. All right, temperature side of this. This is today's high temperatures. There we go. This was what we are going to see tomorrow on Tuesday. Very mild down here in the southern plains. That's Wednesday's high temperatures compared to normal, getting into Thursday. Let's play out through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, what do you see? We just keep seeing brief shots of cooler air, mostly cloud cover, cooling, rain cooling, and that's the effect going on here. And then just very mild air returning behind it. And the newest longer range updates for day 5 through 10, still very mild in this area. Day 10 through 15 is when we start to see the effect of the pattern change. I just want to be watching for this colder air to be getting let out in this direction. That's the first theme we're going to watch, but it's still 2 weeks away from really seeing that. Okay, from here, I want to bring up one important point. Been mentioning this in some of the reports, but there have been some indications that the polar vortex, which is what we're watching here, which is quite strong now, may be undergoing what we call a sudden stratospheric warming event. May happen middle of this month. Could happen right here and possibly on the other side, where we just get this warm pulse getting up into the stratosphere, which can elongate and stretch and disrupt the polar vortex. Now, a polar vortex, when disrupted, doesn't instantaneously cause like a massive Arctic outbreak, but it's something that if this is disrupted, we need to watch for the effect of this to possibly show up again, linking up with the troposphere maybe into next month. I just want to watch that carefully. Until then, this is what the newest outlook for January 20th to February 20th looks like. I do agree with the models that this area is going to continue to stay very active in this pattern. But if we switch back to flow that comes in like this, then the Northwest comes back into play. So does Montana, the interior mountains, and we take California out of play for a little while. How long? I don't fully know right now. We need to see the Pacific Jet re-engage with an extension before we start to see this happen. But there are a lot of folks in California that could use a decent break, but we just need the moisture to come back a few more times this winter to really, prevent California's major water issues reoccurring next year. So that's the newest European model data. Now let's talk about La Niña. La Niña, a couple of important things. The trade winds are still strong here, but we've lost the westerly wind bursts. That's why the MJO is moving around and possibly returning to the Indian Ocean. We've seen a warm-up happening right into this area, and I showed you this last video, but all of our models continue to suggest that this La Niña has peaked and is likely going to be fading quickly through the remainder of winter, and there's still the risk of El Niño developing late next spring and summer. To reiterate, the long-range European model, we talked about this last Thursday, continues to show through January into February and March a very active drought-reducing type pattern. I believe it is too dry in this area, and my major area of concern is going to be right up in here where we've seen the models continue to miss. That's where I'm worried about drought being sustained, but I do not think it's going to stay or get drier in this area. I want to complement that with the newest long-range forecast just released by the NMME, the National Multi-Model Ensemble. First of all, global sea surface temperatures, let's go out there to June, July, August. It has the very same signal that the European does. El Niño coming back. Well, I should draw those arrows properly. El Niño coming back with this negative PDO signal. These compete in terms of what we should expect, especially in the central United States for precipitation. El Niño wet, negative PDO dry. So we got a lot to continue to discover here. But let's go back and let's take a look at least at the precipitation rate being forecast for the remainder of winter. Still very, very La Niña-like. And I think it is therefore too dry here. It is too dry down here, but I'll be watching this area to see how far to the north the rain shadow extends. I do agree with wetter conditions here in a very active Ohio River Valley to the northeast. That's consistent. So with that kind of updated long range outlook, let's finish up with a bit on South America. Over the last few months, we continue to see drought issues showing up in Argentina. That's been one of the major stories. And I just want to put a point to this and compare it to last year. So, for example, I am right now just outside of Cordoba. That's just right here in the heart of their soybean belt. And I want to show you the differences between this year, getting into November, December, and early January, compared to last January's precipitation. See how wet it was last year compared to this year. So they're still maintaining a pretty sizable deficit. I can do the same thing for like central Buenos Aires. Let's go right in through here. So Buenos Aires province. When we click on this, there we go. Again, look at the differences. Very, very wet last January compared to what we've got now. That's the difference we're seeing in this overall pattern. Let's do one more. How about we come up here to Santa Fe? So just right here at this gauge in Santa Fe, once the data are updated, we'll take a quick look just to compare the difference. There we go. Very, very wet last year versus how dry things are this year. So we're just doing some compare and contrast. It's going to continue to stay that way as long as the Antarctic oscillation stays as positive as it is. But there are some signals that it's starting to fade. The MJO shifting around is one of those. And that's why when you look out there over the next 2 weeks, we continue to see drier forecast down here in Argentina. And yes, it's going to last for much of the next week. But there are some indications of less dryness in Argentina and very wet in central Brazil, parts of like Bolivia, getting into Paraguay, over here into Mato Grosso do Sul, Sao Paulo, and Minas Gerais. These are some areas that are showing up continually wet. Now, in the north, this is something we're going to watch. In the meantime, this is not a bad signal, given that harvest progress needs to keep going, and we need to plant the safrinha crop. But should we lose the influence of La Niña and things shift around, we're going to flip this whole pattern on its head in South America, meaning that there could be some dryness on the safrinha crop here and wetter conditions farther to the south. That is going to be top of mind for me as we continue to forecast through our winter and their summer. So I'm going to stop there. I thank you for your extra attention tonight. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.